Okay, you're going to have your things to know on the skeleton last handout, number 2, for 2. All right, that's what we're going to cover today, at least on this PowerPoint. And let's get your sheet. And if you look on the front page, on the left-hand side, we have the cranial bones. Now, the cranial bones right here are the ones that form the brain case. These are the ones that form the brain case that the brain is housed in. That thing on top of your shoulders is called your skull, and it's made up of 2 sets of bones. One are called the cranial bones that we're going to look at first, and the second set's going to be the facial bones, which is right next to it. So the cranial bones, there are 8 cranial bones, but 6 names because 2 of them are paired. Okay, so there's eight bones, but you see that my list here has only 6 listed because several of them, there's one on the left side and the right side. The parietal bones are that way and the temporal bones are that way. So let's look at, here's some words again. Parietal means wall. Occipital means cap. It's the very back of the skull. The word sphenoid means wedge. It goes from one side of the skull to the other. So let's look at these bones, these cranial bones, and get those down. They're real easy to see. The first one is the frontal bone. You see it's on the front of the skull. So it's called the frontal bone, top of your orbits and the front part of your skull. Frontal bone. Then you have 2 that form the walls. The parietal bones. You see that forms the wall. Remember, parietal means wall. And so it forms the 2 side walls of the cranial cavity. The occipital is the one that forms the little cap on the back. It means cap, occipital. Temporal, these are on the side. You have one on the left side and one on the right side, and it forms part of the form of your cheek. You know, the side of your cheek, not the cheekbone on the front, but the side. Temporal bone. The sphenoid, remember it means wedge. It goes all the way through. So what you see on the side here, this looks like a wing. You see these little sutures outline this bone. It looks like a bird wing. And so it's called the greater wing of the sphenoid. Well, this goes all the way through from one side to the other. So let's look on the inside of the skull, and you can see that there it goes, all the way across from one side to the other. You see it's forming part of the floor of the cranial cavity. And the last one is called the ethmoid bone. This is one of the very front. Looks like a little triangle. It's called the ethmoid. Those cranial bones are the bones that form the brain case. That's why they're called cranial bones. Now we're going to turn your page and look on the back at the very top, and it has the sutures. We're going to look at the sutures next. There are 4 sutures that we're going to get down, and they're very easy. The word suture means seam, like you would have in your clothing. It holds the pieces of clothing together. Well, sutures hold the skull bones together. They're a type of a fibrous joint. So here are the 4 sutures that we're going to look at. The first one is called the coronal suture. It goes across the crown of your head, and that's also like the direction that a coronal plane would go. But it goes across the crown of your head. The coronal suture is between the frontal bone and the 2 parietal bones. The coronal suture. The next one is between the 2 parietal bones, right down the middle of your skull, which is why it's called the sagittal suture, right down the middle. And it joins together the 2 parietal bones. one in the back between the parietal bones and the occipital bones is called the lambdoidal suture. So the lambdoidal suture is between the parietal bones and the occipital bone. And it's called the lambdoidal suture because when you look at the sagittal suture and this suture right here, it looked like the Greek letter lambda. And so that's why they called this the lambdoidal suture here. And the fourth one is between the temporal bone and the parietal bones, and it's a flat suture. It's called the squamous suture. Squamosal and squamous, it's the same thing. The squamous suture. So you only have 4 sutures, and those are big sutures. There are a lot more sutures than that. These are just the main sutures, okay? We move on to the front page again. Right next to where you have the cranial bones, we have the facial bones. Now the facial bones are the ones that give you your facial features. They do not form the brain case. Okay, they do not form the brain case. And there are 14 of them, but there are only 8 names because some of them are paired. So we're going to look at these and see some of the names tell you what they are. Lacrimal, tear. Lacrimal gland produces tears. That means tear. The word zygomatic means joined together. You've heard that word before. You've heard of when an egg gets fertilized by sperm, it's called a zygote. Well, it's called that because the 2 nuclei are joined together to form one. That's why they call that new cell that's a diploid cell, got a full chromosome number, they call it a zygote. The 2 nuclei that were haploid have been joined together. So let's look at those. Starting off, you have the nasal bones. And these form the bridge of your nose. Those are called the nasal bones. It's what your glasses sit on. These purple bones, there's 2 of them. There's a suture in the middle here. We're not naming that suture, but these are your maxillary bones. And these are the bones that your upper teeth are set in. So the maxillary bones contain your upper teeth. Inside the nose, these 2 little bones here, these are the inferior nasal concha, and they will come off of a skull. So they are individual bones, and they're part of the facial bones. Inferior nasal concha. These up here are the middle, and there's some even higher that are superior. So you can see the inferior very easily. You look on the inside of the orbit, and there's your lacrimal bones. See that little green one here? It's on both sides. There's a little indentation in it where your tears will, there's a little duct which carries tears down into your nasal cavity. But these are small ones called the lacrimal bones. Your cheeks are your zygomatic bones. You know, some people have high cheekbones. This is your cheekbone. Your zygomatic bone. You see, and remember zygomatic means to join together. Well, it's joining to the temporal bone, the frontal bone, and the maxillary bones. It's holding all 3 of those together. It's in the You look on the underside of the skull and the back of the hard palate. There are 2 bones here called the Palatine Bones. The Palatine Bones form the very back of your hard palate. There's a suture down the middle, and they're individual bones. This bone here is called the vomer, and you can see that on the front of the skull too. When you look in the nasal cavity, you can see that it helps to form part of the septum, which divides your nasal cavity into left and right cavities. You know, sometimes the left side of your nose is plugged up and the right side you can breathe through. Well, there's a wall in between those 2 sides, and this helps to form part of that wall. The mandible, which is the jaw. That's your last facial bone. last facial bone. Okay, so go over these bones. It's just a very short list. We did the cranial bones, we did the sutures, and the facial bones. So go over those and get those down. Go in the same order that I have on the sheet. That way, when you go in the same order, you don't forget them. You know which comes first, which comes second, third, fourth, and so on. It's just like the alphabet. When you say the alphabet, you go A, B, C, D, all the way down to Z. They're all in order. And you don't forget the alphabet. Well, just like this, if you remember these in order, like on the cranial, there's only 6 of them. Facial, there's only 8. And sutures, there's only 4. So go through those in the same order every time you do it, and it's going to be real hard to forget them. When you see them on a test, you'll say, okay, that's a cranial bone, and you start going through. Is it the frontal? Is it the parietal, occipital, temporal, sphenoid, or ethmoid? You've only got those 6 bones to choose from in that list. So use your paper, use this PowerPoint, and go in the same order that I've gone in.